Hi, good evening. This is Mark Gray, live from Normandy, France, on the Project Camelot TV and Freedom UFO. I'm hosting tonight. I have the great pleasure to be hosting live from Peru, Brien Foerster, whom I met back in 2012, 2011, alongside Lloyd Pye and Jerry Wills. Live from Peru as well on a Freedom UFO network event. And tonight he's live from Peru, and he's the famous explorer out there, an archaeologist. He's explored more than 90 countries, but his true passion is about ancient megalithic works found in Peru, Bolivia, and Mexico. Seem to be having some technical problems here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And basically, he has appeared 15 times on the Ancient Aliens television series, as well as numerous other TV and radio presentation. His popular YouTube channel contains more than 850 videos related to ancient archaeology and forbidden archaeology and hidden history and megalithic sites. He's also the author of 22 books, and tonight he's going to talk to us about recent elongated skull findings in Peru that he's come up with, and in Bolivia, and also about his Egypt tour and evidence of a 12,000-year-old cataclysm. He'll discuss his latest research updates and discoveries. And I'm sorry about the sound here. There seems to be a welcome, Brien. You're live from Cusco, right?
Actually, Paracas on the coast of Peru.
Okay, Paracas on the coast of Peru. And tonight you're going to tell us about your updates, what you've been up to since 2011. Last time I hosted you over in France, and everyone can see you now. This is in English, and it's broadcast in all the countries where people understand English and can follow you in this interview. And tonight is going to be a little special because we're going to go travel from your elongated skull findings from Peru and Bolivia and all the way to Egypt and the Middle East and Africa, and you're going to tell us what you've come up with recently. What can you tell us about your latest findings about the elongated skulls? Last time I spoke to you, you had them tested, right? DNA tested.
We had one tested at that time, but since then we've had 4 more Paracas skulls tested, and we have the results of those, and we're just waiting for final approval from the Peruvian government to allow us to do sampling of 15 more skulls.
Wow, 15 more skulls, right. That's pretty amazing. And where do you find those skulls in general? You dig into what kind of sites?
Well, no, I don't. It's illegal for anyone who's not a certified archaeologist to do any excavation. So we have our own small museum, which is connected with the National Museum system here in the director, Senior Juan Navarro, has allowed us to take samples from the 4 skulls that we had analysis of, and then through that and also the major Ecom Regional Museum, we're going to be doing testing of 15 more individuals from the Paracas period.
Right. And what do those skulls? What can they tell us about our history, our ancient past, or even recent past? Because you've talked about this on Ancient Aliens and on my previous interview that we did about the families that have artificially elongated those skulls, the skulls of their children throughout the ages, and And can you tell us the reason why they do that?
Yeah, well, there are many different cultures. Most commonly, about 2,000 years ago, performed cranial deformation or head binding in order to alter the shape of their babies' skulls. This was only done amongst the noble classes of people to physically distinguish themselves from the common people. So we found that there were cultures in Peru, of course, Bolivia, other parts of South America, Asia, Europe, Australia, all six inhabited continents, we find cultures that did this. What's extraordinary about the Paracas people, which is where I am now, is that we're finding examples of individuals that have been born with elongated heads, not the result of head binding.
Oh well, yeah. And how old are those skulls that you come across?
Well, the conventional dating is that the Paracas existed between 800 BC and about 100 AD. And they were wiped out most likely by the famous Nazca culture that came and occupied this area from about 100 AD until 600 AD, when they themselves had to abandon this area because of climate change.
Okay, drastic climate change then back then. What happened to the climate back then? Was there some kind of major event or a natural type of climate related event that took place?
Yeah, actually, the climate of Peru, especially, is not stable. So there have been different periods where you've had not dramatic, but gradual climate shifting. So what happened on the coast of Peru, starting at about 100 BC, was that you had the beginning of desertification. The rains came less and less, and that's what caused the Nazca people to abandon their homeland to the north of here and move into the south, where the Paracas were very successful farmers. And so rather than simply amalgamating with the Paracas people, it seems that the Nazca exterminated the royal class of people that had elongated heads.
Oh, they exterminated them. All right. And what's the specificity because of their hair? Their hair is different from the local natives, right?
Yeah, actually, the more that we learn about, or the more that I learn about the Paracas, the more intriguing they become, because there's almost no standard archaeological examination of this culture whatsoever, and hasn't been for probably 50 years, which I found very weird, because they're a very distinct, or we're a very distinct people who died out 2,000 years ago. Number one, they had elongated heads. Number two, they had natural auburn red hair. And if they had red hair, then that means it's quite likely they were very light-skinned people and could have had either blue or green eyes. And these are not characteristics of Native American people.
Right. And what's your take on their origins? Where do you think they came from originally?
Well, the little DNA testing that we've been able to do is that the only haplotypes or genetic background that we can find of them is either Northern European or Middle Eastern. So that distinguishes them from the standard Native Americans who traveled across the Bering Land Bridge. So they were a very distinct genetic group.
Very distinct. And what do the natives think of these origins that are not local when you talk to them?
Well, the problem is that the Paracas died out 2,000 years ago, so there are no descendants of them. Even the Nazca.
Yes, and can you hear me now? Can you hear me better? Okay, all right. Because I was advised to put on headphones, so there was some kind of feedback with the my speakers, my PC speakers. Um, how long ago? What was the period you think they were living in those areas? For how long did they live there? Um, hmm. There's an echo. There's an echo on your end.
Hmm. Yeah, not now. Nope. Yeah, I was talking about a find that we had in June at Lake Titicaca. And I went there with a radiologist from the U.S. And we found in a small museum a full skeleton with a skull twice the size of normal, a vertical cone head. Well, we found a full skeleton that had a skull twice the size of normal. And when the radiologist looked at it, he said, "That's not human." And I said, "Could you be more specific?" And he said, "It's not a Homo sapiens sapiens. I don't know what it is, but it's not a human being." And then also in the same museum, there was the fetus of a baby, 7 to 9 months old, which its skull was twice the size of its torso. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I gave him until the next morning to really think about it because he and I were both shocked. It's the most shocking finding that we'd had up to that point. And then he said, "I'm 90% sure that that was mother and baby, and both of them died during childbirth." Yeah, we were there for about 3 hours, and then I went back again with a neurologist, and he was very impressed as well. He kept focusing more on the baby than the mother, and he said, I've never seen anything like that in my life." Yeah, well, you have to be very cautious about this. You can't immediately jump to a huge conclusion, but I'm basing my statements on what these two doctors from the United States said, and they both said, "I don't understand what it is." So obviously you're looking at something which is not the result of any kind of known disease. Um, and they both said these are not human beings. Well, that will take further examination. You can't get too much out of two trips. The next step is to get samples for DNA analysis, and also material to do radiocarbon testing to see when these two died. They were both found by it's either a Norwegian or Finnish archaeological team in a royal tomb together. So that further emphasizes the idea that they were relatives. So we're hoping to this month or maybe next month be able to get some DNA or some material to be able to conduct both radiocarbon and DNA testing. Yeah, yeah. Basically, that's what you find all over. Wherever you find elongated skulls in Peru and Bolivia, it's only the nobility. It's not the practice of all the people. It's the ruling class that look this way to distinguish themselves from what the other people, from what the common people look like. Well, you find cranial deformation all over the world, among the Han, in the Middle East, in parts of Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia, Melanesia, Easter Island, New Zealand, most likely. But the ones in Peru and Bolivia are the most interesting because that's where we find examples of skulls that could be natural in that they were born that way. Yeah, yeah, the long barrows of Stonehenge. It seems, according to Maria Wheatley, who's the main researcher on this, that people with elongated skulls were buried in what are called long barrows, and normal people were buried in round barrows. And she says that there are a number of elongated skulls that are being kept in British military bases in the Salisbury Plain area. It's a very active military zone where Stonehenge is located. And so she's trying to get access to other examples of these skulls and skeletons there. Very well. Mm-hmm. Well, as regards Akhenaten, we see depictions in the art, especially of his daughters, of having elongated skulls, but neither Nefertiti's mummy nor Akhenaten's have ever been found. So we don't have physical evidence of them having elongated skulls. However, Akhenaten was very adept at the mystery schools and ancient knowledge of Egypt. So I think what he was depicting was that that's what his ancestors way back in time looked like. Not necessarily he himself, but he was making a portrayal of, this is my origin. And that broke heavily away from any of the other pharaohs, because they always wanted themselves muscular and beautiful looking, and he said to his artist, depict me as I am. And so that's why he looks kind of androgynous and has this depiction of having an elongated head.
Right. And there's also Karen Hughes, who was working for the World Bank, that also made statements about a different species that is running the world of banking, the high-rank banking, and that elongated skull beings, tall beings, were seen at a World Bank secret meeting. I don't know if you've ever read what she testified, but she said that they weren't extraterrestrials, but they were of this earth, basically. Karen Hughes. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I've watched her interviews about that. I don't know what she's basing her information on, though. As far as I can tell, the Paracas, who were the most interesting ones, they died out 2,000 years ago. There are no descendants. But that's what makes them really interesting compared to all of the other people with elongated skulls in the world, is that they actually look like they could have been genetically quite a bit different than us.
Right. Let's try to move on to the next topic about these ancient technologies, where because there are some archaeological sites in Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, Easter Island, Egypt and England and other areas of the world that have ancient megalithic works and sites and that show some type of ancient technology. And you'll be going on a tour in Egypt soon, showing this to the group that will be touring with you, right?
Yeah, in early March. It'll be our 5th annual trip, mainly focusing on obvious signs of lost ancient high technology. We're talking about technology beyond what we have. We're not talking about equal to what we have, but superior to us. And we're looking at a timeline of 12,000 plus years old as to when these things were created.
Right. And what's there that you've well, actually, I want to go back real quickly to Peru, because I forgot to ask you about this French explorer. His name is Thierry Jamin, and he's part of the Inquiry 2010, actually in 2015 now, and he was president of the Inquiry Institute in Cusco, and the person in charge of that project that I just mentioned, and he came up with some major discoveries recently, findings. Can you tell us about that? You know, a giant mummified hand and a skeleton that seems not to be human. What do you think of that? Did you hear about that?
Well, if you see photographs of them, there's a skull, an elongated skull, it's only about this big. It's very small. But there's also a full skeleton about that high, and then a 3-fingered hand and wrist, which are big. And if you simply saw photographs of them, you would say that, of course, they're fake, that they were made up by somebody. But I physically saw them at Thierry's house. And the little skeleton, I have no idea. It appears to be bone and skin material. It's completely desiccated. And the skull is bone-like material with skin on it. The brain is missing. And then the hand, it is a hand of some kind. All of these have been x-rayed and show the skeletal structure. So they're not something that somebody's made. They look to be very ancient, and they do not look like anything that I've seen on this planet.
Right. but it's hominoid. It's not human, but it's hominoid, right?
Yeah, yeah. They're definitely not human. They're not. They haven't been manufactured, but they are humanoid-looking specimens.
Right. And I think he's run into some testimonies of some other explorers there on site that have encountered a tall gray being like what is described in ufology, you know. He was mentioned in that in a recent interview. So, and of course he's been chasing after Paititi, the famous gold, you know, Inca golden city. Are you okay? Let's go now back to Egypt, and let's talk about this these amazing the amazing tour you're putting together alongside others, right? There's a team of. Can you tell us about the whole team?
Sure. Well, this is our 5th annual, but it's actually going to be our last one because we're starting to go off in slightly different directions. But we have Stephen Mailer, who's an expert on ancient Egyptian history, especially an expert on Akhenaten and the whole Amarna family. Then we have Yusuf Awiyan, who lives across the street from the Sphinx. His father was a world-famous Egyptian tour guide. Then his wife, Patricia, who is much more into the esoteric and astrological area, and Susan Moore, who's a Canadian geologist. And so together, we get together to examine some new findings and also some of the standard sites, such as the Giza Plateau, in order to discover and get new data which is not being explored by any Egyptologists.
Right. And these, I guess you've worked with also Graham Hancock and Christopher Dunn, you know, mainly on the Ancient Aliens series as well. Are they going to be part? Are they on site there? Are they going to be part of any of the research that you're doing there, or is it just going to be the team?
No. Yeah, no. I was on tour with Chris Dunn, both in Egypt and here in Peru, and I was on tour with Graham as well here in Peru and Bolivia. But I like to work with different people, so it doesn't make sense to keep exploring with the same people all the time, and so that's why starting next year we're going. And we're going to start looking at more the energy aspects of ancient Egypt. How did the pyramid system work? What forms of energy were created? How the Earth's energies were utilized in terms of this ancient system, and that kind of thing.
Right. What is the Kemet school about? Kemetology. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, Kemet is the ancient name for Egypt. That's what the Egyptians themselves called their land, because Egypt is a derivation of Greek. So everything got corrupted, starting with the arrival of the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then Islam, and Christianity, etc. But when you go back into the pureness of the Egyptian culture, they named their land Kemet, which means the Black Land. And so they specialize in dynastic and pre-dynastic studies.
And of course the stones there in ancient in Egypt show the precision of the stone cutting and engineering that happened back then. Did you manage to decipher or identify what kind of technology or ancient technology they used to cut those stones so precisely?
Yeah, actually the tool marks are there, so it makes it really easy. What we see is saw technology and drilling technology, but the efficiency of the tools that they had were superior to what we have. For example, I just finished making a video for my YouTube channel today, which will be on my channel in 3 days, and it shows, as an example, a saw that was cutting through a block of basalt. The saw blade was 18 feet in diameter and 3/16 of an inch thick. And so whatever material that saw blade was made of is beyond any material we know of.
Right. Is there anything that they used back then that can be rediscovered today, derived directly from the ancients' knowledge and technology? What do you think? What do you think the bypass was made to make this to hide these technologies from ancient past? And do some occult societies or secret societies know about those technologies, and are they using them today, do you think?
Possibly in black projects. The problem is that, again, we believe that the pyramids were built prior to 12,000 years ago, and also the works in Peru and Bolivia seem to be 12,000 plus years ago. They were all destroyed by one massive or series of massive cataclysms around 11,700 years ago, because each of them shows catastrophic damage, not just damage from cultures moving in and removing stones from the pyramid, but actual cataclysmic damage. And so whoever were the builders were probably destroyed by this cataclysm, and their tools and technology could still be buried in the ground in different places, or if they were discovered by archaeologists, then those tools would have been hidden from sight and would be in storage in places like the Cairo Museum, because they don't fit the paradigm of dynastic Egypt, which was a Bronze Age culture. So I'm sure that there are parts of tools that have been found but are being hidden from the general public.
Right, and it's there's a military base right at the bottom of the Great Pyramid, right?
There are military bases in Egypt close to most of the major sites.
Right.
And there's even one, I can't remember its name, nobody would have heard of it, but it's part of the Giza pyramidal complex, which is right in the middle of a military base, and no one, not even archaeologists, are allowed to go in there. It's completely off limits.
What do you think that is? Is there some type of technology, or maybe stargates that need to be protected, or some intruders, kept away from it? Or because there's big stories about stargates being reactivated, activated, deactivated throughout the ages, and that may be a stake in some of those conflicts, armed conflicts that there are going on around the world, and specifically in Africa and the Middle East.
Well, yeah, I think that all of these ancient megalithic structures, including the possibility of stargates, would have been damaged to the point where there's no way they would function. And they were created by beings or people far higher in terms of intelligence than what we have. So attempts to rebuild something like this could be underway, but I don't think any of them function, because we're simply not smart enough to make something like this work at this point in time.
Well, officially, in the mainstream, we're not smart enough, but in the black projects level, what's done with aircrafts, secret aircraft technology, it's like 50 to 200 years away from what we see now in our skies. So at the same time, they're still showing us technology back from the space program from the 60s. So to take off to the ISS. So there's a major gap, between what we think we're not able to get to and what's being hidden from the public. Just like the ancient anti-gravity technologies, or the electricity that a pyramid was able to produce, right? I think it was Chris Dunn that talked about that, or electric power.
Well, he did, but he, as far as I can tell, he hasn't done much in regards to that for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. So I personally don't think they generated electricity, because that's something we think of. We always have to put anything like this in terms of what we understand. But I think the energy that was being utilized, and I mean energy, not electricity, but the energy being utilized there is beyond our capacity to presently comprehend. I think it was more of an energy for altering human consciousness rather than lighting light bulbs up or something like that.
Right. Well, you know, some say it was like the first Tesla-based wireless lighting system out there back in the days, but you know, there's no real material proof for it today. But these are just assumptions or theories driven from findings and from, you know, different researchers' opinions. Also, have you taken into account the fact that there was a lot of water around and on ancient sites with pyramids and megaliths, and maybe there was some major use for it, for the water to run into the structure, and you know, maybe have some kind of usage, maybe some type of healing or curing type of usage. The water.
Yeah, actually all of the above. That's what I'm going to be focusing on more when we go in March, because I believe that the Great Pyramid system functioned without any like there were no moving parts. We always think of machinery, but that's kind of our primitive way, honestly, of doing things. For example, the airliners that we travel in today are almost no different from ones that existed 40 years ago. We're really not advancing, at least in the public realm, at all. You know, we still run gasoline-powered cars with our forms of energy, still hydroelectric, etc. So I think we know for sure that there are tunnels and shaft systems under the Giza Plateau, because I've been in them, and they go at least probably 10 stories underground. And so that I've been 3 levels underground at the Giza Plateau. And so it seems that the tunnel system, which goes through solid bedrock for multiple miles, was feeding water from the Nile, and possibly a larger river that once existed, and that water traveled under the Giza Plateau, and through harmonics and through moving through very specific dimensional shafts and tunnels, set up a harmonic resonance, which is then what the pyramid utilized in order to be able to broadcast the energy. And then the energy was then received by the obelisks, which were located in strategic locations. And so that was very much like a wireless or Wi-Fi system, which is something that Tesla reinvented. Tesla obviously studied the ancient people and concepts, and was trying to bring back this very harmonious kind of energy production into the 20th century, and he was killed off because he wanted to present it for free. And so that of course is what people are starting to look at now on a microcosmic level, is how to do things like zero-point energy and things, but not in giant factories, in little stations like for individual homes. And I think that's the only way it's going to be successful.
Right, and also the healing properties of a certain area, a certain part inside the pyramid, where all the I guess the ley lines are crossing, and we're able to maybe you know, reprogram water, and we're made out of water. So I know I have a friend who also researches these things, that builds pyramids and puts a glass of water, you know, inside a specific area in the middle, and it has some healing properties, actually, curing properties. So
well, it also seems that the pyramids are actually locked into the bedrock. They don't simply sit on top of them, but they 3-dimensionally lock themselves in. So they seem to have been using the harmonic properties of the planet and amplifying that. So that's harmonious with the Earth, and that would also be harmonious with us. As well, I don't think that the interior of the pyramids were being utilized by people, because when these things were functioning, you couldn't survive inside of one of those. But there are other places like at Saqqara, this one specific place which is called the hospital, and that seems to be where the energy was utilized in order to be able to diagnose and cure human beings, but it's an outside space. It's not an internal space like the interior of the Great Pyramid.
Right, right. But the beings that were there that built the pyramid, weren't structurally probably not equivalent or similar to our human beings today that we are. They could have had a different biology, body biology, and the different containers altogether. So they could have reacted differently from us, right?
I think the original ones, yes, but it's honestly my belief that the early line of the ancient Egyptians stemmed from people who came from Sirius, and I think the Syrians are quite similar in terms of their genetics to us, and that they may have been the ancient seed of that culture. Over the course of time, you would have had interbreeding with normal human beings, and so over time, the genetics would have become more stilted towards Homo sapiens sapiens. But I think Osiris and Isis were not fictional characters. I think they were actual life forms.
Right. So, what is the common background to all those beings that built the pyramids around the world? Apparently, they didn't build them in the same period of time. Right? There's some various time periods. When maybe the ones in Latin America were built, the ones in Egypt or Africa or China or Eastern Europe were built. Do you think they were the same civilization or different factions of species or people or beings?
Well, I think the ones in Egypt are the oldest, by far, by far the oldest. And the ones in Mesoamerica dated to 2,000 years ago. I've been to many of them. They're not that well constructed. There's no real evidence of ancient high technology there. But the term pyramid itself is a derivation of the Greek, which is pyromedos, which means the fire within. And so I think that is a description of the probably 8 great pyramids in Egypt. But the ones in Mesoamerica, I think, were slightly energetic structures. They would be put on ley lines and underground water sources and would generate a very light kind of energy, probably to assist in things like prayers and other rituals. But the ones in Egypt were power or energy plants. Nothing ceremonial about those. They were very pragmatic, and then were later adopted by the dynastic Egyptians, who used them as tombs, religious centers, and things like that. But whoever built them in the first place, I think, were very logical beings or people of a very different mindset from us. Right.
Very different mindset, but the megaliths were built prior to the pyramids or afterwards?
Sorry, the what?
The megaliths, the big stones.
Well, yeah, all we can say is that we're looking, like in Peru, Bolivia, Egypt, Lebanon, Turkey, Greece, Italy, maybe Angkor Wat and places in India. We see megalithic work which could not have been done by the cultures that academics say built them. And so we date them all at being 12,000 plus years old. We can't tell how much older they are, but we can say pre-flood. And we figured out that the flood was 11,700 years ago. And so, yeah, I think they're all contemporary, more or less, but definitely 12,000 plus years ago.
Right. And what was their their use. What did they use it for? You know, like the Stonehenge, the Adams calendar in South Africa, Stonehenge sites, and other megalithic sites like in France, you know, in Karnak. What's your take on that, and what's the research saying from your standpoint?
Well, the work we see in Egypt, and also Baalbek, parts of Baalbek in Lebanon, and the megalithic works in Peru and Bolivia, I think we're looking at three separate ancient cultures who did that work. And what we're looking at there is we're looking at phenomenal precision in stone cutting. No mortar involved. You can't fit a human hair in between the blocks. So that's super high technology. But when you look at places like Karnak, which I've yet to go to, but Stonehenge and places like that, you're looking at the ability to move large stones, but you're not looking at the ability to cut with precision. So that's the difference. The mystery of the European works are how did they cut and move the stones of such great size, great distances, but it's further complicated in Egypt and Lebanon and Peru and Bolivia in that the precision of the work would be very difficult to achieve in the 21st century.
Right, and what do you think the reason is for this major secrecy from the mainstream educational system, or or official history has been lying to us so much? What's the reason behind it, you think?
Well, I think it's because they've set up a paradigm, and the paradigm is that civilization started 5,000 years ago. In Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and Sumeria. Sumeria is a little older, but they're vehement about that. So anything older than that completely destroys their whole essence of being. And that's the unfortunate thing we're at right now. But by introducing scientific evidence that some of these structures are much older, then what they have to look at is that the civilizations that they think are the oldest are actually a renaissance of much older cultures that were far more sophisticated, Atlantis included.
Right, Atlantis. Yeah, what was the part that Atlantis played in this whole megalithic building and pyramid building? Was it during or before or afterwards that you think the Atlanteans came about? Because I know I've interviewed Sasha Lisson, who's an anthropology doctor in Hawaii, and he was telling me that this is all related to the Anunnaki story to begin with, and Atlantis was built from the big conflict between the two brothers, Enki and his brother. Enlil.
Well, actually, yeah. Unfortunately, the only real account we have of Atlantis is from Plato, who got his account from Solon, who got his account from the ancient Egyptians. So it's been watered down to that time, and then has been corrupted ever since. So you have this one account by Plato that's been diluted. But the interesting thing is that the information he had was that Atlantis was destroyed about 11,600 or 700 years ago. So Atlantis would have been ruined at the same time as the megalithic works in Egypt and Peru and Bolivia. Of course, Atlantis, they say, sank underwater, and what the scientific evidence is telling us is that 11,700 years ago, which was the traumatic end of the last ice age, according to Dr. Robert Schoch, the waters of the Earth, or the oceans of the Earth, rose by over 100 meters in possibly less than 2 weeks. So that would have been the destruction of Atlantis. Atlantis didn't sink, but the oceans rose up and swallowed it. So therefore, in order to find evidence of the main site of Atlantis, you have to look at parts of the ocean that are less than 100 meters deep. And I suspect that where you're going to find that information is mainly around the Caribbean Sea, or the Gulf of Mexico, where you find the Bimini Road and other possible remains. Also, there's a lot of data that shows that off the southern coast of India, that there are sites that are less than 100 meters deep, which are megalithic cities, and also possibly in the Mediterranean as well.
Right. There's been some remains and found undersea in the sea, even pyramids, right, at the bottom of the ocean.
I haven't seen any convincing photos of pyramids, but I've seen photographs of impressive underwater structures that clearly were made by somebody. They're not natural formations, but again, the governments and other institutions are trying to hide this information. But the problem they're having is that the new data and information is leaking out faster than they can possibly cover it up. So they're losing their paradigm quite quickly, and they will lose it, and history will have to be rewritten.
Yeah, that's the thing. The story being written, and they're the three monotheist religions ruling the world today and dividing it wouldn't be as credible as they can still pass for, today, pretend to be today, and that's the big predation-based control of the masses that still believe in him. That would go away, and people would learn to think for themselves, without turning towards a guru or false guides or pedophile priests. So that's a major stake, and also for the atheist people who don't care about that, it's also a big revolution spiritually, because they're totally disconnected from anything spiritual. What do you think the spiritual part of all those megalithic structures come into play when it comes to maybe activating those sites on a different scale and level of energy? With the maybe the magnetospheres and the ley lines that are crossing, and maybe opening new realms, new frequencies, accessing new dimensions, like Jerry Wells did on the Muru gate there, the big wall that he got sucked into, that he told us about in Peru. Mm-hmm. Do you think those sites can still be activated, like the one in Peru? Muru doorway seems to be still activated, at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're all still energetic to this day, because I sense that when I'm there, but they're only running at maybe 1/100th of 1% of their potential, because the great cataclysm would have knocked all of these things. They were precisionally set up along the ley lines and things for energy, and the great cataclysm would have knocked them all out of whack and damaged them, so they can't function the way they did. Also, it's very possible that at that time, 12,000 years ago, that our planet was perfectly vertical. Cataclysm did is it knocked our planet 23.5 degrees off. So that would have damaged everything, like where the positions of the ley lines and energy lines were working. And so they are active, but I don't think they can ever be turned on to the full potential of what they once were. Again, I don't believe that when the Great Pyramid was functioning, there's any way you could survive inside of it, because it was probably running at 1,000 or 1,000,000 times the energetic potential of what it is now. It still has energy, and that's why people like to go in and meditate, because it's still tuned to the harmonics of the earth, but just at a very dissipated rate.
Right. I think I have a few questions from listeners. They're able to hear us and watch us. Are other megalithic sites connected to the global structures? So it's safe to assume there were many civilizations before the Bible and the RCC. Has Brien been to Karan Tep? Wonder if that will ever get excavated. Wonder how much bigger, smaller it is than Göbekli Tepe.
Oh, Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been yet. I know a number of people who have. Supposedly, there is one giant ring that has been excavated, but supposedly that's something like 1/30th of its size. It's supposed to be massive, and it's become very controversial. They've been able to carbon date it at being at least 10,000 years old. That's scientifically shown. So that's twice as old as standard civilization right there. But now there's some controversy. There's a lot of pressure, I think, on the Turkish government to not allow much more excavation to be done there. I would like to go at some point, but unfortunately Turkey is being destabilized by Islamic terrorism. So I'm going to have to wait until it stabilizes before I could possibly go with any kind of tour group.
Do you think there's a connection between those? Well, we're not going to mention it, but terrorism is majorly state government sponsored, and this whole duality, staged a theater that we live in, is becoming more and more obvious than that all intelligence services of the world are cooperating to stage terrorist acts and so forth. But some countries and spots are targeted specifically. Is it? I think there may be a connection to archaeological discoveries and findings that may overturn their version of history, and that may endanger their power position. Do you think there's a connection with that? Like Turkey, you mentioned, Egypt, has been also hit by those so-called terrorist acts, and tourists were killed and so forth, and other areas of the world, like Mali and Sudan, and wherever there's some major discoveries that can be uncovered. What do you think?
Well, the great thing is that you have so many people looking at physically going to these locations, which is what's important, because trying to get information from the internet is one thing, but physically being there, especially if you have, for example, an engineer with you, and if possible, a physicist and a chemist and a geologist and people like that. There's so much activity going on at different sites in the Middle East and Egypt and South America and Southeast Asia now that any so-called power elite cannot control what's going on, because there's so much evidence that's being discovered by thousands of different people. So there is no option but that this new information about ancient civilizations is coming to the general public. There's no way to slow it down or stop it. It's accelerating rapidly. So the battle is being won.
Right. Yeah. Little by little, people turn away from their education programming system and official history and whatever the mainstream will try to impose upon them and go visit and research those sites and figure out that we're not the first civilization to have walked the earth, and that our origins are probably totally different from what we've been learning so far in modern history. You think it's changing rapidly, or it's taking some time? And what effect is it going to have on our human psyche and collective consciousness in the near future? What do you see our upcoming years or months to become? Are we going into some type of new cycle? There's been some maybe you think a golden age would be possible, or has it ever existed on this planet, a golden age of peace and harmony on this planet? And you think we're going towards that or not?
No, I do definitely, and I think it coincides with the precession of the equinoxes. You have universal 26,000-year cycle that happens. And it goes half and half. It goes from a point of lightness into darkness and then back into light again. And so I think around 13,000 years ago was when we descended into a period of darkness, and now we're just rising back out of that again. And that's why all of these discoveries are happening. That's why you have all of this destabilization in terms of governments and banking systems and things like that, because some people are waking up to this. I don't think the general public will, but a lot of people are, and it's accelerating. Even the end of the Mayan calendar, which is what I'm writing a book about right now, because that was so nonsensically misrepresented. The Maya people never had an oral tradition stating that the world was going to come to an end. It was the complete opposite. So you have these Western writers misinterpreting indigenous wisdom for their own, usually financial reasons, as in writing a book about it, etc. But they got the whole story backwards. What the Maya said is that 2012, or December 21st, 2012, was the first day of a new age of enlightenment. It was the end of a world, but a world to them means an age, not the world. So that's why, December 21, 2012, nothing happened. Because it's also something that is subtle. It's a curve that moves up from a trough. So we are rapidly expanding our knowledge and acceptance of the fact that we are much older as civilized beings than what we've been told. And so that's what I and thousands of other people are working on.
Right. Well, it allowed them to create a movement called survivalism, and make money off of it, and also exploit the fear-mongering aspects of it, on the population. So, but you think like I do, that there's a critical mass building up towards consciousness opening to other areas of our origins and genesis and DNA that may be able to help opening it up, reactivating it, or activating some of our DNA is being called junk, but which is not. Has there been any? Have you come across any DNA information or genesis information among your archaeological research and findings?
Can you be more specific?
Our origins, as far as a species. Did you come across any information that we were genetically created, and by whom, or was our DNA taught in such a way that it wasn't fully activated for a purpose, that we're not fully operational, or we don't have full access to our, well, first off, free will, and can be easily controlled or shepherd,
Yeah. Well, I think I think 12,000 years ago was a period of incredible enlightenment and knowledge, and the capability of constructing things like these megalithic energetic centers. But then you had this cataclysm, and you had societal collapse. You had a high percentage of the population being wiped out, and so the survivors went into survival mode. And I think that's where the whole concept of the caveman comes from, which has been misrepresented in archaeology and anthropology. So you had this traumatic shock to what was left of civilization that went on for probably 6,000 years. And then you have the rise of patriarchy, which is a very controlling mechanism, which we're still living in to this day. But all of that's starting to break down. Because of the new knowledge that is, the new ancient knowledge which is coming up, more people seeking their own sovereignty, questioning what they've been taught. And so that's why there are so many of us building a scientific foundation for the evidence of these ancient megalithic structures, because that's what we have left. We don't have the people, we don't have a lot of the other artifacts, but we do have the stone buildings and other structures which are telling us that they had to have been done by cultures superior to us.
Right. So you think this trauma-based society, human society, dates back from the flood trauma, and everything is based upon the fear, the survival, spirit, mind, to get on with our material and physical life, and get away from any spiritual consideration, for example. Dates back from the flood, the great floods.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a flood. It was a global we're talking global cataclysm.
Right.
Not just the rising of sea level, but if you incorporate Dr. Robert Schoch's theory about plasma ejection from the sun, it could have been that plasma was part of this whole destructive mechanism that hit the Earth, and that caused the melting of the ice and the rising of sea level, which would have put pressure on the crust of the Earth, which would have turned volcanoes on, created huge earthquakes and other forms of devastation. And according to his theory, this cataclysm wasn't like a one-day event over 300 years. So you have this incredible traumatic thing that went on generation after generation. So people on a psychological and physical level went into survival mode, and something like that, none of us can fathom how devastating it was. And so it would have taken a long period of time to pick up the pieces of what was left of even the knowledge of the past and try to piece it together. But then you have these controlling mechanisms evolving, say 5,000 years ago in different parts of the world. And we've been living underneath that shroud of secrecy up until very recently.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this was just a coincidental or accidental cosmic event that just happened, turned out that way, or was it actually sparked by some type of energy or higher entities, or a group of beings, or I don't know, galaxy rulers or masters, and just to make us go back to our reptilian brain functioning, and left brain based type of survival mode, to be more able to be more controllable and easily deceived by our rulers or any false guys that would come up. What do you think? This is a sheer accident? Is it a cycle that comes around every 26,000 years, or is it something that has been created, not sponsored, but triggered by something, by someone, by an energy, by a group on a galaxy level?
I honestly think it's a natural cycle, mm-hmm. And I think it happens every 13,000 years, more or less. If you look at the work of physicist Paul Laviolette, his theory is that the core of our galaxy is not a black hole, it's a pulsar. So he's an astrophysicist, so he would know what he's talking about. And so every 13,000 years, because it's not a black hole, it doesn't just constantly fill itself with energy. It reaches a point where it maximizes, and then it has to spill out some of that energy. And so I think every 13,000 years you have an ejection, according to his theory, of energy that goes across the galactic plane. And so in this case you would have gamma rays and all sorts of very destructive energies that would have entered our solar system, possibly destroyed one of the planets, which we now call the asteroid belt, would have knocked the planet Uranus on its side because it's rotating this way. It would have knocked our planet 23.5 degrees. I think Venus is actually rotating backwards. That could have been the introduction of our moon as well. And then it could have brought comets and asteroids in its path. And also if the energy went straight through our sun, then that would have caused the plasma energy burst that would have hit our planet. So I think it's a natural cycle of destruction that happens every 13,000 years or half precession.
Are we any close to the upcoming one, the next one?
It could happen 5 minutes from now, or it could happen maybe 1,000 years from now, or more, or maybe 2,000.
Right. Because we see some really heavy solar activity. We see some pretty heavy cosmic activity as well. But then again, all those prophecies that have been written don't really fall into place in the right time period that they describe the event to be happening. But then again, in all those ancient civilizations, you find tales and accounts of the great floods and all those big catastrophic events as the anger from the gods. The gods were angry at us, at humans, like some kind of a revenge or punishment. In some of the ancient tales, what do you think of that? Is there anything true to that or can it be interpreted a different way, like the electric universe theory that says that planets were the gods and those were just natural cosmic events, like you're saying?
Yeah, I think we're looking at natural cosmic, for me, natural cosmic events. And the problem with storytelling is that if it isn't held intact from its origin to the present, then it gets corrupted, watered down, misrepresented, used for different purposes and things like that. So I think it was a succession of natural events. And again, what's important to emphasize is that more than 200 indigenous cultures have a flood myth, and they never talk about a local flood. They talk about something that enveloped their entire world as far as they could fathom it. And when you get into the physics of this whole thing, again, it's not simply water rising and burying people and having to build boats and float away until the waters go back down again, because the waters didn't come back down. They rose by 100 meters and they're still here. But more importantly is looking at when you have another 100 meters of water being displaced from mainly the North Pole, but also the South Pole, and you have the tilt of the Earth altering, and that, making a move like that, 23.5 degrees, means that some parts of the world went from being temperate to being Arctic almost instantaneously. Other ones went from being temperate to Arctic. Others went from tropical to temperate, etc. That's going to destroy almost all of the ecosystems. The ecosystems have to rebuild themselves, and so I think those stories are metaphors. They talk about gods as being vengeful. I think, again, that's part of the fear model of the vengeful, angry God. I'm much more of a believer in a creative energy of the universe that created us and everything, and does not have any kind of vindictive nature at all. I think that's a creation of humanity in order to control other people.
Right. What do you think of those Eastern European sites that have come up recently? Like the Bosnian pyramid and the Busegi mountain, the Mount Busegi in Romania, where there's like a cavity underneath that was identified by an American satellite back in 2003 or 2004, and created a few books by Peter Moon afterwards, who talked about a holographic chamber inside and some giants' remains and so forth, and it linked and 3 tunnels linked to Tibet and the pyramids of Egypt and another area. Have you heard about that? I think I sent you a link about that. The Busegi mountain and the Sphinx in Bu-Segi is like a stone that we don't know if it's natural or it was carved by humans.
Yeah, I've seen photographs, but I tend to not have much of an opinion about places I haven't been to. Someday I'd like to go to the Bosnian pyramids and see them myself, because they're very controversial. There are those that really believe that they are pyramids, and there are those that say they're not. So unless I've physically been to a site, I don't really have an opinion, because you're depending upon other people's thoughts and knowledge, and that's kind of dangerous. But Dr. Sam has invited me to Bosnia, and I'd love to go. And some of these other places, I don't know if I want to explore every mystery on the planet. I'm not particularly interested in going and seeing the pyramidal structures that are in China, just because they look like impressive earth mounds, but they're nothing, from what I've seen, to be comparative to the pyramids of the Giza Plateau. They look like somebody put a lot of effort into building large mounds of earth in China, and that doesn't particularly interest me. So my focus tends to be more Egypt. No, Egypt by itself is so fascinating, and most people who go and see Egypt don't get much of the big picture, because we do know that there are real tunnel systems underneath not only the Giza Plateau, but also probably locations like Karnak. There could be tunnels that actually physically connect the two together. So you're talking hundreds of kilometers. Those are likely real, as in real live, as compared to speculation. So Egypt by itself could take an entire lifetime, but also, of course, living in Peru, there are places I still haven't seen, and so I depend upon local sources, shamanic people I know who live here, who still have a lot of incredible ancient knowledge that they're slowly letting trickle to the surface. So yeah.
Yeah, and pyramids in Ukraine, have you heard of them in Ukraine?
Yeah, I've heard, but again, it's not something that I would, the Bosnian pyramids have been studied for quite a long time. So that would be a place of interest, but there are so many places, they say there are pyramids in Alaska, that there are pyramids in Antarctica that are being covered up. So who knows? Antarctica is one place I would never want to go, because it's too damn cold and too far away. But I'm always intrigued. I'm intrigued by all of these stories, but there's only a limited number of places you can physically go within reason.
Right. And the story about those structures in Antarctica, that look like pyramids. What do you think of that? Because they talk about a natural phenomenon called the Nantok or something.
Well, the only thing that intrigues me about Antarctica, which again I will never visit, because I come from Canada and that's cold enough. But this whole theory that if the planet 12,000 years ago was vertical, Antarctica would be over here somewhere. So Antarctica would have been probably temperate, and that would make it a candidate for having ancient megalithic sites. So that's what intrigues me about it. And now that the whole continent is, who knows, there could be very fascinating places there. And why do so many scientists go there? They can't simply be studying the climate. How many people do you need to study the snow, or the fact that the ice is breaking up, or counting sea lion populations? There has to be something mysterious to Antarctica, way beyond climate and bird studies.
Right. Well, besides pyramids, there's also an old Nazi base that's there. The New Schwabenland, and Admiral Byrd, told about the Operation High Jump conflict and war at the end of World War II that happened there, and they basically got their butt kicked by the Nazis with advanced technology. So, and with the Western world has been cooperating with them since Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II, and so we know who they're visiting there, more or less. It's the most protected area in the world as far as the military is concerned. You know, but various defense systems from several countries. It's a no man's land. I have a question from a listener. If you still have a few minutes, according to Paul Burley, Pillar 43 depicts what our skies look like now, constellation-wise, etc. So if purposely buried, then it seems like it is a message for us in our time, written 12,000 years ago. Paul Burley, have you heard of him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if our planet shifted axis by 23.5 degrees, then that means that the whole constellation system changed by 23.5 degrees 12,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So when people try to use ancient sites for processional studies, it's difficult because the whole processional concept would have been different. One kind of intriguing thing about the site called Karnak, which is in Egypt, is that a lot of the ancient sites in the world are aligned to almost perfect north, south, east, and west, and that's based on solstices and equinoxes. You want to know exactly when the year ends, or halfway through, or a quarter way through. So you align monuments to the rising and setting of the sun, and more complexly you can get into the moon and the stars and things like that. But the whole east-west axis at Karnak is 23.5 degrees off east and west. So that could very well indicate that it is a pre-cataclysmic site. That originally it was aligned perfectly, and then when the cataclysm happened, the whole alignment system went completely out of whack.
And what was the main purpose for this alignment to begin with? In the first place, who do you think was built it and run it, and what for? What was the major purpose for it? Was it to like acupuncture points on the earth, maybe to maintain harmonious energy or flooding of the atmosphere or whatever, or was it total control of what was on the planet?
Well, I think the energetic systems were isolated to their specific regions. Mm-hmm. So the Giza Plateau, it's not just the Giza Plateau, it's Dashur, which is in the south, where you have the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, seem to be contemporary with the three great pyramids of Giza, but then you also have Abu Rawash. Abu Rawash, which most people have never heard of. That was a giant pyramid that was totally taken apart. So that area in the ancient terminology is called the land of Osiris, and or it's called Bu Wizard in the native dynastic, pre-dynastic language. And so I think that was an energetic complex isolated to that area. I don't think it was feeding energy globally, but it was in that area. And again, the term Bu Wizard, wizard is where we get both our modern words, wisdom and wizard, from. So it's a very ancient terminology. But then you have the complexes in the highlands of Peru, like Machu Picchu and around Cusco, where you have Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo and Cusco itself. And I think that energetic system was also isolated to that area itself. And then when you go south, you get to a location in Bolivia called Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, and that is unique. Whoever built that complex did not have anything to do with anything else. So I honestly think you're looking at three different civilizations. The builders of Egypt, as well as Baalbek in Lebanon, I think they were the same people, and other locations in that area. Then you have the area of the highlands of Peru and then you have Tiwanaku and Bolivia, but there's also intriguing new evidence based on people I know who have been to India within the last year of major megalithic sites that have been built on top of by the so-called Indians, or the Hindu-based peoples. So we're hoping to go there next year because we see very similar things there that we find both in Peru and also Egypt. You have these weird knobs projecting from stones, megalithic foundations. So yeah, and as time goes on, we'll discover more and more that sacred locations are built on megalithic foundations that have nothing to do with the people who built the structures on top.
Right. So were they just trying to build on an old system that didn't quite understand the usage for? I mean, the tools that they could use from it, or did they just try to build their own new system over it?
Well, I think the basic way it worked is that these ancient megalithic sites were very powerful in terms of energy, and so then after the Great Cataclysm, they were basically taken offline. They no longer functioned even at 1% of their capability, but they still had energy involved in them, and human beings are sensitive to energy that way. So that's when they became spiritual places, and then after that, religious places. So, to this very day, you can make a pilgrimage to these places, and you will, if you're of the mindset, you will feel the energy of the place. You'll feel a sense of alternate mindset. You might be able to draw energy and knowledge down from aspects that you don't get in the middle of New York City or somewhere like that. So they still have that, and that's why people still go to them to meditate and stuff like that. But the energetic function is nothing compared to what they once were. Even as you know, things like the cathedrals of Europe were built on ancient power points that were probably more powerful prior to the building of the cathedrals, but the cathedrals still harness some of that energy, and that's why as you open the doors of the cathedral and walk down towards the altar, when you get to the altar, you are in an alternate state. That's where the term altar comes from, because that's where you connect with your aspect of the divine.
Right, exactly. So this awakening that you seem to believe is happening, I think is happening too, of the critical mass. Can it be helped with those megalithic structures being reactivated? In some ways. Is there some kind of techniques or a methodology to reactivate those sites? Even though they've been damaged by the great floods, to heal.
No, I don't. I don't think so. I think they've been damaged beyond possible repair or reconstruction. Again, they've physically been taken offline, so they can never be turned on unless you're able to turn the planet back up this way again. But the important thing, people go with crystals and things and think that they're doing something. Maybe they are on a small level, but I think the important thing is to try to scientifically and psychically figure out how they originally worked, so that not that they can be rebuilt, but so that that knowledge can be reutilized in the 21st century on a micro level. For example, to be able to create an energetic field inside of your house or one room that helps you to advance on a spiritual and even intellectual level, which is also the way that the new concepts of energy are being done now. They're being done on a tiny level by many different people, because the powers that be will never allow systems like the electrical grid to be taken over in a nice and beneficial way, but they can be turned into dinosaurs by modern technology revitalizing the concepts of Tesla, etc. And there are so many people doing this research that there's no way they can all be tracked down and stopped anymore. Tesla was one guy at his time, but now you have hundreds, if not thousands of people in different countries on the planet coming up with new and innovative ways of creating energy, of making energy more efficient, and things like that. And that is the future. It's the same with the internet. The more that knowledge is freely exchanged, the more we have a chance of turning more people on to how the ancient world functioned and how that wisdom from the past can be utilized today.
Right. How does it apply to the quantum physics and the holographic universe theory that's being more and more pushed forward by, since Greg Braden and Michael Talbot and others, Taylor de Chardin and so forth, that we're in a holographic control grid, matrix system, and it's everything is about photons and frequencies and virtual reality, basically, and we're there's two trends going this way, different ways, part ways. There's the transhuman robotic, the machine and the human being merging together, and makes a transhumanist robot, sort of like an organic robot, like they're trying to gear towards that. And there's also a comeback to the old tradition and old traditional natural world and eco aware type of humans. What do you think this gap is going to get us to? There's this like two big trends parting ways in today's world. So,
well, again, if you look at the way that the ancient megalithic structures work, they honestly worked in a harmonious way with the energies of the earth and the universe. So that requires an incredible level of intelligence to be able to do that, to do something harmonious, in balance on a profound level like that. So I think if we can get back to that, that would be very beneficial to the future of humanity. This other stuff is getting into Frankenstein territory, and I'm very much afraid. Even though technology is a wonderful thing. This is a great thing. It's like this is a computer in my hand. It's like wow, but unfortunately, we can really get this. This thing can really get out of control, and will be controlled by, or be attempted to be controlled by very nefarious people here. So I think the whole idea of trying to amalgamate humanity with electronics and artificial intelligence is very. I think it's really dangerous, and I'm personally not going anywhere near that. This is as far as I like. This is like I could turn this thing off, whereas some of this other stuff, if it's incorporated as part of you, no, thank you.
And sometimes it doesn't work as fine as we expect it to work, like tonight.
We don't understand the way the universe works, even 10% of the way it actually does. And so when you tinker with things where you don't have a full understanding, that's where you get into really big trouble, such as things like modification of the atmosphere, which the people really know is going on, and it's completely insane, because quite often it turns out that their experiments are going backwards. Rather than cooling something down, it's heating up and makes the planet go out of control. The planet wants to balance herself off, and she does have the mechanisms to do so, but not when people keep tinkering away
and pushing the limits of what she can tolerate.
Yeah, no, it's just like the scalar waves, ionosphere bombarding from by the HARP project, which is not a project, which is admitted to be a real weather control program and also mind control program, connected with the chemtrails and also the smart dust noosphere program that was also confessed publicly. 50 patents were registered by the Russians as well. So the Western world and the Russians, and I'm sure the Chinese are doing the same, are playing, Dr. Strangeness with the weather control. Well, it was admitted that they used weather control to create a big hurricane on northern Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So that's admitted facts. So like you said, it's messing up with the natural course of natural weather conditions. One last question, and then I'll let you go with the final word and on your update and what you're going to do next in the next month or so. The big controversial topic that I've been approached by so many people telling me about these flat Earth facts that they seem to be very animated about. What do you think of this flat Earth theory that's been coming back up to the I guess the blogosphere or even all around the world? And there's some very disturbing videos and explanations that make us think that maybe we're not on a totally global globe that we think we live on.
I don't believe it at all. I don't believe it at all. I've flown around the planet from both directions, north and south. Right. I've seen the curve of the Earth when I've been sailing. I see the moon round. So no, I think that's I see no credibility whatsoever in that idea.
Right. Because their main theory is that as you increase in altitude in an airplane or a hot air balloon, the distant horizon always stays at eye level, and no matter how high you go. And the fact also that NASA lies a lot about what they've been showing us since the beginning of NASA.
Well, I'm sure that they have. And they've done basically, that was it. After that, Mars. No, nothing. And if they are doing it secretly, then it's of no use to us because we're not going to be able to utilize any of this. But we were given this promise and hope in the late 1960s that all of this was for the betterment of humanity. And ever since 1969, it's gone completely, at least for the benefit of us, it's gone nowhere where we can utilize any of it, except maybe, again, stuff like that. Right.
And we see the same rockets as during the 60s taken off. So it's, the smartphone has been invented since the walkie-talkie and talkie-sized phone, and nothing else has changed, has moved, and all those budgets have gone into black programs. So, Brien, I'm gonna, have you tell us about your upcoming schedule in the upcoming weeks, and give us a last update, and we'll let you go. And thank you for all this time that spent with us tonight. And sorry about this technical glitch that we've had. So. Let us know about what's next for you.
Yeah, the technical glitch may have been at my end, I'm not sure, but people do have to understand that Peru does not have the infrastructure of Europe or the United States. So the internet is something that's been improving really rapidly in the last year. But I still have, even though I spend a fortune on the internet, it's still, and I'm in a very rural location, so it's never as pristine as it is in the U.S. or Europe. So I'm very sorry to the listeners about that.
There was a question pertaining to that from also another Brien. Are you getting any cooperation from the Peruvian government? You know, like fundings or sponsoring or backup or, you know?
No, I don't. I don't want any assistance from any institution or government because they want the information. What I do is for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I make a living by selling books and videos. But 90% of what I know is given freely because it's my. I feel I have to. So we are working with the Peruvian government because we do want to do extensive because pre-Columbian in Peru is owned by the Peruvian government. And so all of the interesting ancient skulls and monuments and things are older than Columbus's arrival in the New World, making them Peruvian things. And so we are working with them on a very beneficial basis right now. So we're within days or weeks of getting the final permission to do the extensive DNA testing. It's a process that started more than 2 years ago, but we are getting there. And I just recommend anybody who's interested in what I'm going to be doing in the near future, have a look at my website, which is hiddenincatours.com. That has all the tours on it, almost 900 videos, interviews, photos, all sorts of stuff like that. And again, it's called Hidden Inca Tours, but 90% of it has nothing to do with tours. It's just I've had that website for about 8 years, and changing the name at this point would be catastrophic. So everything is there. I have almost a full-time webmaster because the content is massive.
Right, it is massive, and it's a life changer for our mind and our consciousness, because we learn to know more of our true past and history and origins. So I encourage everyone, all the listeners, to go check your site out, you know, and purchase your videos and your books and get to know what our human history is really about. And thank you so much, Brien, and we're so happy to have you. And I